When you hear Book of Numbers, your brain probably pictures this long, kind of dry list of names and figures, right? But what if I told you it actually holds this brilliant solution to a massive organizational problem? Seriously, let's dive into this because what we're about to see is way less about a simple head count and way more about a masterclass in community logistics. And it all revolves around one single critical question.
I want you to just imagine this for a second. You're part of a nomadic community. Your main place of worship, the actual dwelling place of God, isn't some stone building. It's a super complex portable sanctuary called the tabernacle. So every single time you pack up camp, you have to take the entire thing with you. This isn't just a big moving job. It's a sacred duty where one wrong move could have life or death consequences. It was a truly divine dilemma. So the problem was really two-sided. On one hand, you've got the practical nightmare, right? Just the sheer complexity of taking apart, hauling, and then perfectly reassembling this holy site. But on the other hand, there was this spiritual debt. See, after the Exodus from Egypt, God had laid claim to every firstborn son in Israel. But think about it. If every family had to give up their firstborn to go serve at the tabernacle, the entire community structure would just fall apart. It seemed like an impossible situation, but it had a surprisingly elegant, divinely inspired solution. And that solution? It was an entire tribe, the tribe of Levi. God basically designated them to solve both of these massive problems at once. They would become the dedicated caretakers of the tabernacle, and they would stand in for all the firstborn of Israel. But before we get into the how, we really need to understand a key distinction within this very special tribe. Okay, so this is crucial. Not all Levites were priests. The priesthood itself was exclusively for the direct descendants of Aaron. They were the only ones who could actually approach the altar and perform all the sacred rituals. Every other member of the tribe of Levi, the Levites, they were the essential support staff, taking care of all the tabernacle equipment and duties. It was a really strict hierarchy, and if any non-priests got too close to the holy things, they would die. Simple as that. So how exactly did this fix the whole spiritual problem with the firstborn sons? Well, the Levites were about to take part in what you could call a sacred swap, and it all kicked off with a very special kind of census. But why count from just 1 month old? That detail is actually fascinating. In the ancient world, infant mortality was incredibly high, so a life often wasn't officially, counted until a child survived that really critical first month. This census wasn't for an army. Its only purpose was to count every single available Levite male who could take the place of a firstborn son from another tribe. And the grand total? It came to 22,000. That's 22,000 Levite males from 1 month old and up who would now be consecrated to God's service. This freed up the firstborn from all the other tribes of Israel to stay with their families. It was a perfect one-for-one exchange. Or, almost perfect. Turns out, when they did the math and counted all the firstborn sons of Israel, there were 273 more of them than there were Levites. So what do you do with the leftovers? The solution was basically a ransom. A specific price was paid for each one of those 273 firstborn sons, and that money was given to Aaron and the priests. So with that spiritual debt all settled, it was time to get down to the logistics. And this is where that masterclass in logistics really kicks into high gear. A second census was taken, but this time it was to organize the Levites into what you could totally call the Holy Moving Company, a highly specialized workforce designed for one thing and one thing only, moving the tabernacle. Now this second count was way more specific. It only included men between the ages of 30 and 50. See, military service started at 20, but this sacred work, it required something more. That age range, 30 to 50, was chosen to make sure the men had the maturity, the wisdom, and of course, the physical strength needed for these incredibly demanding and holy tasks. This workforce was then split into 3 specialized divisions, all based on their family lines. First up, we have the Kohathites. I want you to think of them as the high-security, high-value transport team. They were given the most important job of all, carrying the most sacred objects of the sanctuary. And their cargo list was just staggering. We're talking about the Ark of the Testimony, the table of showbread, the golden lampstand, the altars themselves. These weren't just objects. They were the absolute holiest items in all of Israel. And the rules for handling them? They were lethally strict. Yeah, the rules were absolute. The Kohathites couldn't even look at these items, let alone touch them. The priests had to go in first and meticulously wrap everything up. Only then could the Kohathites enter and carry the items out, using special poles on their shoulders. A single wrong step, one unauthorized glance, meant instant death. This job was the very definition of reverence. Next up were the Gershonites. So if the Kohathites handled the holy furniture, the Gershonites were like the interior and exterior specialists. They were responsible for all the coverings, curtains, hangings of the tabernacle. So that included the huge tent itself, its multiple layers of coverings, the ornate screens for all the entrances, and all the hangings that made up that outer courtyard. Basically, they were in charge of packing up all the fabric components of the entire structure. And let me tell you, this was not a light task. To handle the sheer weight of all these materials, the Gershonites were assigned their own transportation support, 2 heavy-duty carts, each pulled by a team of oxen. This little detail just shows you the incredible scale we're talking about, even for the fabric parts. And finally, we get to the third division, the Merarites. These guys were the structural engineers of the Holy Moving Company. Their job was to transport the literal skeleton of the tabernacle. They were responsible for all the heavy hardware, the frames that made up the walls, the bars that held them all together, the massive pillars, the heavy bases they stood on, plus all the pegs and cords needed to secure the whole structure. This was the heaviest job, bar none. And if you need proof, just look at what they were given. The Merarites got double the transport of the Gershonites, 4 carts and 8 oxen. That one practical detail tells you everything you need to know about the immense weight of the tabernacle's framework. And this just gives us such a clear picture of the division of labor. When you look at the total workforce of 8,580 men, you see a perfect example of resource allocation. The Merarites, the ones with the heaviest load, they had the largest team at 3,200 men. The Kohathites, with the most sacred but physically smaller items, had 2,750, and the Gershonites had 2,630. It's just a perfectly organized system. So when you zoom out from all these details and numbers and duties, what do you really see? You see so much more than just an efficient moving plan. You see a divine blueprint for how a community can truly thrive. The whole point of this incredibly intricate system was to create order. It's like project management on a divine scale. By dedicating one specialized tribe to these very specific tasks, it guaranteed efficiency, it maintained reverence, and it let the rest of the community function without constantly disrupting family and economic life. Everybody had a role. And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this whole ancient account. The principle behind it is absolutely timeless. A healthy, a mature, and a peaceful community is one where every single person understands and diligently fulfills their specific role and responsibility. Each part is essential to the whole. So it kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The Levites had their duties so clearly defined, from carrying the Ark of the Covenant to hauling wooden frames. It really makes you wonder, in our own complex communities today, what is the essential role that each one of us needs to play for the whole thing to truly thrive?